a friend was staying with me and his daughter sent him a live lobster. And I did that terrible thing myself. Partly not of my own volition, because in the past I've tended to put them in the deep freeze in the hope that they go to sleep and die peacefully. I have no way of actually knowing that. But on this occasion I did the terrible thing. I put the lobster into the boiling water. And I will never do that again, because although it has no vocal cords that we know about, it must have been painful. And I made the mistake of opening the lid at one point, and the claw shot out.
Right.
And that is a moment rather like my imagination of this poor man going to the gallows or the animals in the abattoir. That's a moment which will always live with me in great shame.
What's your name, sorry?
Rick.
Rick, I'm Jack. I'm going to write your name down so I don't forget. These gloves. Rick. Okay, so thank you for talking to me. So, like I said, I'm not trying to change your mind on anything, but for the start of the conversation, it'd be good to get an idea on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being that you're completely happy with society's treatment of animals, and 10 on the other end of the spectrum being that you want to see a complete change to like us all eating a vegan diet. Where would you put yourself on that scale?
You placed animals straight away into the food chain in that question, because you talked about removing them from our diet. So is the question focused, therefore, on how society treats domesticated animals reared for food rather than animals more generally?
Yes, farmed animals, yeah.
Okay. And in terms of treatment, are you focusing on the process of killing, which can be more or less painful and horrible, or the entire life cycle of the beast prior to that?
Yeah, good question. I guess I'm trying to encompass all of it. So zero would be that you don't want to see any changes. Maybe somewhere in the middle could be you want to see some changes, but you still want to continue us eating animals, or you're happy, you don't see an issue with us eating animals. And 10 on the other side of the spectrum would be completely like, no, we must all go vegan in the future.
Yes, that's very interesting. It's very human-centric, that question. It's all about us and not about them, which is very typical of our race, I'm afraid. It's also extremely general. Every animal, from a wild fish being caught in a net through to battery chickens, poor things.
Maybe I should make it more specific. Maybe I should say, let's say, how much are you motivated to go vegan on a scale of 0 to 10?
The difficulty with that question
Oh, God.
is that it sort of removes, in some ways, removes the animals. Doesn't completely remove the animals, of course not. But then there are questions of, slightly Epicurean questions of, is what one sees on a plate in a vegan restaurant really what you want to eat? But I'll try and put that out of my mind. I think the answer, I will finally now answer your question, because unfortunately you made the terrible mistake of stopping a lawyer, as you probably realized by now. I think that society doesn't treat animals well, so I would say I'm a 6 or a 7 in terms of treatment of animals in the food chain. And in terms of veganism, which is a separate question, which is more about us in a way, I'm down at the 2 to 3 level. In other words, I'm not particularly pro it. Good luck to anyone that wants to do it. I don't think that biologically, sadly, we've yet evolved to the stage where we can healthily live without some form of animal protein. I may be wrong.
When you said 6 or 7 in terms of the treatment of animals, why is 6 or 7 and why not a 0? Like, what have you seen or heard about?
Well, I think mainly of the terribly cramped conditions that some animals are reared in, but also the moment of death is a very critical thing, and there must be great terror at that moment. I've recently lost a case, I was involved in a case that was lost about a drug mule in Singapore. His name is Panir Salvam. I mention his name as often as I can because he will be dead soon. And I often think about him and his walk to the gallows, which will happen in the next few weeks, and the terror of that moment. And in a way, the cattle being put through the abattoir, or those stories we heard a few weeks ago when there was a lot of gassing of young pigs. They're not stupid. And those last few moments, minutes, possibly longer of terror are, I would have thought, deeply, deeply regrettable.
You think that animals have a capacity to suffer, they have an awareness of what could be happening to them, and you think that when we're farming them in cramped conditions, like in factory farming, and when they're in the moments before their death, leading up to their death, you think they're probably suffering quite a lot?
I think there was a lot in that question. And as far as that very last point, the moment of death, of course they know what's going on. I think we humans underestimate animals in so many different ways. And they're very sentient. They have all the same emotions as we do. They feel pain as we do. And I speak with a certain sense of guilt because a couple of years ago, maybe even just last year, a friend was staying with me and his daughter sent him a live lobster. And I did that terrible thing myself. Partly not of my own volition, because in the past I've tended to put them in the deep freeze in the hope that they go to sleep and die peacefully. I have no way of actually knowing that. But on this occasion I did the terrible thing. I put the lobster into the boiling water. And I will never do that again. Because although it has no vocal cords that we know about, it must have been painful. And I made the mistake of opening the lid at one point, and the claw shot out.
Right.
And that is a moment rather like my imagination of this poor man going to the gallows or the animals in the abattoir. That's a moment which will always live with me in great shame. It was very tasty, but that's no excuse.
Right. Wow, that's kind of a horrible story. So
No other way of describing it.
yeah. So you think that the lobster has the capacity to suffer, and yeah. So what do you think the lobster would have might have been experiencing? Like how?
Pain.
Right. How bad do you think it could have been?
Off the scale, I would have thought.
Did you talk to the people you were with about this? Was it like a discussion or?
I spoke to my house guest, and he's a very old-fashioned chap, so he may have thought I was being a bit namby. But on the other hand, he runs an animal estate in South Africa, and he's trying to introduce species, and he's a great lover of animals. He's the sort of man who would order 50 tortoises, and they come in a van to his 5,000-hectare estate. He's trying to rewild it and reintroduce elephant and leopard and so on. And they open the back of the lorry that the tortoises come in. We're in South Africa here, about 3 hours drive northeast of Cape Town. And they all disappear and he never sees them again. But he has the knowledge that he's made them happy,
Right.
which is a much better feeling to have
Do
than the lobster.
Sure. Do you remember how you felt when the claw came up, when you noticed that the lobster was suffering?
I was scared of the lobster at that moment, which is ludicrous if you think about it.
But it's kind of like an instinctual reaction, I guess. Yeah.
And you think of that phrase, which is not really for seafood, red in tooth and claw. And, well, the claw was red. So, a memorable moment.
Yeah.
I think in those Chinese restaurants where they have the big fish tank, this may be my imagination, but sometimes they, mainly in the Far East, where, of course, their attitudes to the subject we're discussing are extremely primitive. And they ask you to point to which lobster you want.
Yeah.
And one always feels a bit later when that lobster, or possibly a substitute, comes to the table, and always wonders if the family members of the late lobster are looking at you through the window of the aquarium and seeing Uncle Bert being eaten. Of course, that's a fantasy.
Sure.
But,
Yeah, I guess yeah, it's a fantasy. I guess it's unlikely that they'd be thinking that, but they may perhaps care about others around them.
well, they eat each other, so, I mean, they're no better, but,
Yeah.
And if they have pain and feel pain, which they do, maybe we can also be critical of them, because lobsters will eat each other at the drop of a hat. So, can we judge them? Of course not, because that's what they do naturally. But then can we judge ourselves? Because we are natural eaters of animals and fish.
Right.
So it's complex.
Yeah, and I guess with being a lawyer, this is kind of relevant, because I guess maybe there are some human beings who we'd say perhaps aren't morally responsible, or maybe they lack the moral agency that some others have, right? Do you think that animals possess similar moral agency to us, or do you think there's a distinction there?
I clearly not similar to us, but clearly they're capable. Certain species, I think warm-blooded, are capable of affection, and whether that can be said to be on a scale which then moves into morality, I'm not sure. But it's an interesting question, and one that I didn't expect to be discussing when I got off the tube at Covent Garden.
Sure. We've talked about animal suffering and how it's kind of obvious to you that this animal is suffering. Why does it matter to you? I guess because you could see them suffering and you could just get on with your day and not worry about it.
An excellent question, and I think the answer is it's an irrational reaction. I think it doesn't bear analysis. It's just a visceral, emotional reaction, which one doesn't want to see suffering. So it may well be perhaps my character. I'm a bit soft-hearted. But that's just to replace one question with another.
Yeah.
It's not an intellectual reaction. It is definitely an emotional reaction.
Right. It's just one of empathy.
Yes.
Yeah. I suppose, would it be similar to how you'd react to a human suffering?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you said earlier about can we judge ourselves because it's a natural thing for us to eat animals, and I'm thinking that maybe there are many things that we could say are natural. And I'm wondering the relationship to something being natural and something being moral, or let's say that you were shown evidence to suggest that eating meat was absolutely natural, our ancestors needed to survive, completely natural behaviour. Do you think that would show us or give us any information on how we ought to behave?
Well, I don't think there's any question that eating meat is part of our background. Every morning when I brush my teeth, I see my canines.
Right. Brushing your teeth is unnatural, I guess.
It is. It's modern hygiene. So I think eating animals is part of who we are, or certainly who we have been. And eating them without cruelty, if it's possible, then should be pursued.
The question I'm interested in is if we acknowledge that that's descriptively what we have been, we've been omnivores, eating animals, does that tell us anything about how we ought to behave today?
I think, per se, no. And my answer really focused on the methodology that we would apply, and if there are ways of doing it without suffering, then that would always be preferable.
Yes. You would rather that humanity cause less suffering to animals? Yeah.
Indeed, and to each other.
Yes. I'm wondering if you've ever had a personal connection yourself with an animal.
Recently, I have become not a dog owner, but a dog minder. And I think a lot of my answers, particularly about affection, have been informed by a bond that I formed with this particular dog, who's called Basil. And we get on extremely well, and I feel I have almost got an intellectual connection with him.
Right. Has your relationship with Basil taught you anything about the capacities of non-human animals?
Oh, very much so. I'm so impressed by the way that dogs read your face, read your movements, their infinite patience when you're on the keyboard for 3 hours. But as soon as you close the lid of the laptop, the dog stands up. The cues are all there.
Right.
And also those moments when the dog gets depressed, which is very rare. They seem to be relentlessly cheerful. And that is a moment when I see suffering, and I immediately go and try and cheer him up and throw the ball and so on. Of course, what has to be remembered is that dogs are one of the great technological achievements, if not perhaps the greatest technological achievement of humankind, because they are a construct, and the most brilliant construct, given all those qualities that I just mentioned. They've been bred in over millennia, and it is an extraordinary partnership and process between humans and dogs. We've harnessed their superior sensory abilities, and they've harnessed our affection and view that they can be useful to us. It's a very fine symbiotic relationship, but they are highly artificial animals. You've only got to look at sort of Pekingese, Great Danes, extraordinary variety, and then compare them to your average wolf to see it's been an amazing technological journey, even though they're furry.
So it's like very obvious to you that this dog has a complex inner life, capacity to suffer. I'm wondering, because we mentioned like how we've genetically kind of engineered them with selective breeding to make them certain ways. I'm wondering if you think other animals, like say pigs, also share these capacities, the capacity to suffer, the capacity to experience joy and like have a relationship with you.
I have no direct experience of pigs. I'm mindful of Winston Churchill's comment about pigs, which is that when a pig looks at you, it looks at you as an equal. So he obviously spent some time with pigs. I think, of course they do. I think it's supreme arrogance of humans to think we alone have emotions, memories. I've added affection. I've got no real way of proving it. There's no affection in fish world, I presume, because there is no bond between parent and child because of the way they reproduce. It's quite different. So you'll never, and they may or may not be warm-blooded. I don't know. But of course there are emotions. I start from the default position that they're just a variant of all the spectrum of qualities that we have.
Just going back to something you said before, where you mentioned that when you see an animal suffering, like a dog or a lobster, I guess you have a desire to alleviate that suffering and make their experience better.
Well, not in the case of the lobster.
Right.
That specific lobster, it got eaten.
Right.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, you said that you're filled with great shame and regret. So I imagine that if you could go back in time, you would.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess the thing is, I guess most of the animals that we interact with, we're not seeing them suffer. And like maybe that's one of the issues. So like we can be very empathetic when we see a being suffer in front of us, but if that being is hidden from us and maybe what's happening to them isn't very transparent, it's kind of hard to you're not going to have that emotional response or that empathetic response.
Death has been completely removed, both human and animal, from the vision of certainly the metropolitan world. And if people saw more and understood more, then they would probably not eat meat.
You think?
Yeah, absolutely.
You think that if people saw what was happening to animals, they wouldn't buy the products?
Absolutely.
Do you think if you saw what was happening to animals, would you buy the products?
I might buy less.
I suppose the lobster example is interesting because it's very unusual for people to, I feel like in the culture I've grown up in my life, it's very unusual for us to have a direct experience with the animal while they're alive, the animal that we're eating. I suppose generally speaking, we're kind of just paying the money and someone else deals with it for us. But when I think about it, to me, it doesn't feel like there's a moral distinction between me paying someone else to do it or me doing it myself.
Of course not.
Yeah.
It's simply a question of your imagination and the scope it has to ponder the issue.
Yeah, and I suppose some issues we kind of would rather not think about them, perhaps.
Absolutely.
If it makes us feel uncomfortable.
Indeed.
Especially if it makes us feel things like shame.
Yes.
Or regret.
Yes.
Because they're not very nice emotions.
I mean, this conversation will be very memorable, and maybe I'll get a chance to see it in due course if you have a YouTube ID. It's not going to alter what I order for lunch at the Japanese restaurant around the corner.
And
which may be a failure of imagination on my part.
Right. Well,
but it's mainly going to be fish.
I'm wondering.
No lobster.
What is it? What is it that motivates you to buy the animal products? And like, by the way, like I said at the start of this conversation, I'm not. The aim isn't to like change your mind here, but I'm interested in exploring your beliefs about it. So what is it that motivates?
I think habit and flavour. And I do need protein.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you've got the habit and the taste, the sensory pleasure we get from it, and on the other hand, you've got the you care about the animal suffering.
But it's abstract, without being at the abattoir.
Whereas the lobster isn't.
The lobster is very real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you acknowledge that you got sensory pleasure from eating the lobster,
Yes.
but you still wish you didn't.
Hadn't done that.
Yeah.
Of course not.
So would it be fair to say that you care more about the animal suffering than you do about the taste pleasure?
Well, I would find another way of.
Getting taste pleasure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like avocado or something.
Talking of sensory deprivation, my hands are now very cold.
Oh, I could either give you my gloves, or I could
don't.
let you go. Okay, I won't keep you much longer. I'm sorry. Okay, I guess there's like kind of two questions I'd like to ask you. First one is, do you think there is a moral difference between a pig and a dog?
No.
No. Okay, you think that they're moral equals. Is the implication of that we should be treating them in ways that reflect that?
Yes.
And would you agree with me when I say that we're not?
We're not treating them equally badly. Is that your question?
Yeah, I guess I think our culture here is set up in a way where we can treat dogs like members of the family, whereas pigs and chickens and cows, we don't really view them as individuals, and we're treating them in ways that is quite terrible.
You grew up in a town, did you?
Yes.
So did I. I grew up around here. So I think if we had grown up in the country on a farm, we would have a one-to-one relationship with, depending on the farm, but the chickens and the pigs, they'd have names. You'd still send them off to be killed eventually. So I think we've got two urbanites talking to each other here.
Yes.
So I think we got to remember we have a slightly warped perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think perhaps that warped perspective makes it much harder for us to kind of acknowledge them as individuals. It's very abstract when I think about a pig. Like a pig is a pig, all pigs are the same. Don't have that feeling for a dog at all. I'll finish up any minute now. I'm so sorry. This has been a really interesting conversation. So I'm kind of.
And for me.
Yeah, I would keep you longer if I could.
Very cold.
So okay. Given that you think like the individual animal suffering is terrible and you would rather it didn't happen, and I think that you acknowledge that regardless of whether you're the cause of it or whether someone else is the cause of it, it doesn't matter. Like what matters is that the lobster's in terrible, unbearable suffering. Given that belief, like on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being that you would rather see a societal shift towards veganism and increased animal rights, and 0 being that you're completely happy with the way things are in society, where it's legal to boil lobsters alive, it's happening all over the UK. Where would you put yourself on that scale?
Is this in terms of inflicting pain?
Yes, I mean the reason. So
That question is a little bit imprecise conceptually.
sorry, yes.
That's fine.
The reason I'm actually vegan, and the reason for that is
Don't look it.
what does that mean?
No idea.
Because I'm still alive, you mean? The reason I am vegan is because of animal suffering, because I don't want animals to experience unpleasant experiences, and I think that I want to see a world where we're not inflicting violence on animals, where it's not legal to boil them alive. So like I'd say 10. Let's say that 10 is you think that animals deserve equal consideration to us. Not equal treatment, they don't need the right to vote, but equal consideration.
Yeah.
So there's a 7 out of 10 pain for a pig matters equally as a 7 out of 10 pain to a human, all else being equal.
Yeah.
And 0 is you can do whatever you want to animals.
Right. I'd put probably around 7.
Okay, well, I won't keep you any longer.
Well, do you have any good restaurant recommendations as a vegan? I mean, of course.
I do, yes.
Could you jot them down?
I
if you
will.
have a note?
I'll take your
Jot
email
down. Yeah,
address if that's okay.
I'll give you my email and do send me A, the vegan restaurant recommendations, and B, the link so I can see all the other people you interviewed.
Yeah,
today.
absolutely.
So
Perfect.
shall I just do that?
Yes, please, thank you.
Sorry, I've got to run off now.
Sure. I really appreciate the
It's
conversation.
been fun. It's been cold.
Yeah, the first one of the day.
Okay, well you can't just have me.
Yeah.